Good morning, Professor Singh, members of the panel, my supervisor, Dr. Tosin, and learned Da Vinci colleagues. Thank you for the opportunity to present my proposal doctoral defense. The proposed title of my thesis is A Conceptual Business Incubator Framework for Junior Mineral Exploration and Development with a Southern African focus. I've inserted this slide probably after you received the presentation, as this was the front page of the Financial Mail just a week ago. The title of this Financial Mail cover is Junior Mining in Descent, and it quotes from Dylan Thomas's famous poem about rage against the dying of the light. I would just like to read the last verse of that poem because I think it forms an important backdrop to what I'm about to present. And you, my father, there on the sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. My agenda will follow as such. I will firstly talk about my research context, the selection of the research problem, a preliminary literature review before going into my research philosophy, design and methodology. I'll then talk about the limitations of my study, the significance of my study, and I will then conclude before I open up the presentation for discussion. So firstly, moving straight into the research context. The headline here is clean energy minerals require between 19 to 42 times more production in order for us to achieve even the most conservative of sustainable development scenarios. If one looks at the right-hand side of this graph, 42 times more lithium will be required, 25 times more graphite, 21 times more cobalt, and the list goes on. So this is what is required in us to make the planet more sustainable in the long run. However, if one looks at the amount of money going into mining at the moment, capital expenditures are only up 18% and market capitalization is only up 7%. And this is not nearly enough investment, seeing the significant shortfall in production for us to meet the sustainable development scenarios. And I think what is an important point to measure here is that the total mining company market capitalization across the globe is less than half the $3 trillion of the market capitalization of AI giant Nvidia. So who finds these deposits? Well, juniors are the engine of growth for the mining industry, in that over 60% of commercial discoveries are made by juniors. So what is a junior? A junior is a company typically focused on prospecting, exploration and techno-economic studies and has a market capitalization of less than $100 million. And how are these funded at the moment, and what is the trend on these fundings? Well, what I've illustrated in this slide is the funding going into the Toronto Stock Exchange, and in particular the venture capital exchange of the Toronto Stock Exchange, where over 1,400 juniors are listed out of a global approximately 2,500. So the TSXV is essentially a good proxy for the amount of money going into juniors. And you'll see over the last 3 years, this amount of money has begun to dry up. So funding going into juniors is drying up. And this complements my previous slide where market capitalization and funding going into mining companies is at a low ebb. So where are these critical minerals? Well, this slide illustrates Africa's share of current mineral production, and let me add, it has a much greater prospectivity than many parts of the world, so this could significantly grow. You'll see that cobalt is almost 70%, manganese is 75%, platinum group metals is over 60%. And if you look at my text box on the side of this slide, you will see a quote by the UN Trade and Development Secretary General, Rebecca Greenspan, where she talks about Africa being absolutely critical to the global energy transition. So, why is there a need for an African fully integrated mining business incubator? Well, the research shows that the vast majority of juniors follow an ad hoc approach and over 90% of them fail. However, my research has shown that the 3 known fully integrated mining business incubators, none of which are based in Africa, have been going on for several decades and have launched many, many companies. If I flag the first one there, the 162 Group out of Ireland, was established in the 1960s and has created 30 companies. Research has shown that these incubators de-risk, stimulate and fast-track the mineral exploration and development process. And much has been written on business incubators, particularly in the tech space, around AI, particularly in the pharmaceutical space. And look at the tremendous work which was done to produce a COVID vaccine. But very little specific academic research has focused on the area of a fully integrated mining business incubator. So why am I selecting this as the research problem? Firstly, a little bit of background about myself. I have an honours degree in mining and exploration geology and an MBA, and I focused my MBA thesis on the assessment and impact of risk in the selection of new mining projects. I spent 20 years working in a corporate in the exploration, mining and strategy space, and for the last 20 years I've spent working in the junior world. I'm now running my 4th listed junior, and I've happened to have success, and of course I've happened to have failure too as well. And this project for me, this thesis, is an important legacy project for me, so that I can wrap up my almost last 40 years of learnings into something for future junior mining entrepreneurs in Southern Africa. And I think that's a really important point. You remember the slide I mentioned a moment ago, where 1,400 juniors were listed on the venture capital exchange of the TSX. Well, sadly, in South Africa, only 5 companies are listed on the junior, on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. And if one looks at the graph on the right-hand side, you'll see that our share of global exploration spend continues to plummet to 1% and below, despite the government's goal of trying to achieve 5%. So I hope my proposal and my research will begin to address this particular dichotomy. So why is mining so important for the 5th Industrial Revolution? And many will see this as counterintuitive, because the 5th Industrial Revolution talks about human-machine collaboration. However, without mining, these machines will simply not exist, because where all the minerals come, the cobalt, the PGMs, the lithium, to create these machines. So what must mining do to embrace the 5th Industrial Revolution? Well, it must continue to focus on environmental and ethical impacts, sustainable and responsible development too. But equally, there is an opportunity embracing the 5th Industrial Revolution in terms of mining. And nowhere is this more germane than in the exploration space. And in the bottom right-hand corner of my slide, I illustrate a company called Cobalt, which is worth over $3 billion, which is using massive data sets combined with artificial intelligence to discover new deposits. And they found a new deposit in northern Zambia in the copper belt, which has been mined for several decades. And it's no surprise that people such as Jack Ma, Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates are funding such an initiative. So what are my research aims and objectives? Well, firstly, my research problem statement is the absence of a fully integrated junior mineral exploration and development business incubator for Southern Africa. And my research aim is to develop a conceptual business incubator framework for junior mineral exploration and development. I have 3 research objectives. The first is to critically evaluate how juniors develop and discover mines. The second is to determine the reasons and extent of the shortcomings of juniors and why they fail. And finally, to determine whether the 3 integrated mining incubators, being the 162 group, which I mentioned earlier, the Lundin group and the Hunter Dickinson group, collectively known as the named integrated mining incubators, are more successful than standalone junior companies in discovering and developing mines. So this is my thesis framework. I obviously lead off with the primary research question and the research objectives. I then go into the proposal, which I'm presenting today, the literature review, which is already far advanced, and the research design and methodology, which I'm also presenting to today. Following this and following the important ethical clearance and the presentation of my literature review, I will hopefully be then able to move on to data collection and analysis before findings and discussions and recommendations and conclusions. So what are the results of my preliminary literature review? Well, the literature identifies 5 different kinds of incubator in the mining space: university-based, government-based, corporate, private investment fund-based, and integrated. And the benefits of these incubators, as defined by the literature, are mostly around technology, AI very, very importantly, risk mitigation, funding access, environmental, social, and governance compliance. However, the literature does state some very clear criticisms of mining incubators in the long development cycles. It will take 10 or more years from a discovery through to a commercial mine, and that excludes the point in terms of finding that discovery in the first place. And secondly, capital intensity. Mines can cost hundreds of millions of dollars. And thirdly, regulatory hurdles, which are particularly important in the mining space. The literature is strong on technical components of exploration and mine development, and to some extent on financing. However, there is a gap in terms of fully integrated mineral exploration and development incubator, which offers end-to-end support from the mineral concept all the way through to commercialization. And commercialization can be defined as an operating mine or the sale of a particular mineral asset. I'd like to highlight some of the key papers which I addressed in my preliminary literature review. Firstly, a paper by De La Roche and Latham, which talks about what are the kinds of support which business incubators in the mining industry provide. Another paper by Hodgkowitz, which talked about technology development, particularly around the use of advanced geophysics, artificial intelligence-driven exploration, and sustainable mining practices. Jamasmi was one of the big critics of mining incubators, where he highlighted the amount of time it takes for a mine to develop, as well as items such as regulatory challenges. Coming more local to home, Dr. Mike Seeger, who was granted his PhD from the University of the Witwatersrand, developed a game plan for junior companies where he particularly focused on financing. And he's written several papers and a couple of books on this area too as well. And finally, Sykes and Trench. Trench was a colleague of mine at the Royal School of Mines some 40 years ago, where they focused on the exploration business and developed a business case for greenfields exploration. So what are the literature review gaps and shortcomings? Well, my preliminary literature review has identified only 3 fully integrated mining incubators: the 162 group, which I've mentioned already, the Hunter Dickinson group, and the Lundin group out of Canada. And you'll remember these groups have actually been in existence for several decades, which is an interesting counterpoint to the point that 90% of juniors actually fail. There is very little academic research on this concept, and therefore this research aims to begin to fill this gap. So what is my research philosophy? Firstly, I started with my own personal philosophy, as I felt that was an important grounding for moving on to my ontology and epistemology. I have identified my research philosophy as being that of a stoic pragmatist, someone who merges a focus on practical results with emotional resilience and acceptance. And interestingly, in my research of other mineral explorers or mineral explorers who've been around possibly for as long as I have, we do seem to share a fairly similar personal philosophy. My ontology is that of a relativist and subjective, and this is something a little bit different from what I was early on in my career, where I focused very much on the deductive perspective, and I authored and co-authored several technical papers, but subsequent to my master's and then particular working in the area of the social sciences, I have a relativist and subjectivist ontology. This then leads to my epistemology of being an interpretivist and constructivist. So following this, my research approach is inductive, in which I will develop theory from the observations and the data in which I'll gather. I'll use a qualitative research strategy using a purposeful sample group of between 8 to 12 semi-structured interviews, and this will be my primary form of data collection, and I'll support this with a secondary form of data collection around the historical analysis of mining success and integrated mining incubators. I'll then conclude by doing a thematic analysis of the data to produce my theory and my findings. So here are some of the example questions. The first one might sound a very obvious one, but I think it will reveal some very interesting answers. How did you conceive of exploring in a specific area? What internal factors cause junior companies to fail? Are you familiar with the concept of an integrated mining business incubator? And what types of support do you think you should have? And finally, if you were to begin your journey, what advice would you offer to an aspiring junior mining entrepreneur? On the right-hand side, I've put photographs of Dr. John Cheeling, who happens to be my chairman at the moment, probably one of the world's most foremost serial junior mining entrepreneurs, and Lucas Lundin, rest in peace, who was also a phenomenal mining entrepreneur. Ethical considerations are vital in a research thesis, but even more so actually in the mining environment, which is seen in South Africa and Southern Africa as being a bit of a political hot potato. Therefore, informed consent is really important, voluntary participation vital, and in particular for mining companies which are listed. So not only do they have to adhere to company law, but also stock exchange law and regulations, confidentiality and data protection. I must be particularly aware of potential study bias and conflicts of interest, seeing my role in the junior at the moment and my long career in the industry. One of the more important things which have come to the fore in terms of the literature is ensuring diverse perspective, so not just a standard Western view in terms of the discovery and development of mines, and then of course the importance of environmental sustainability. In the mining industry, we call this the social license to operate. So what are the limitations of my study? Well, first and foremost, and I think you would have gathered this from 3 slides ago, the relatively small population. And the population is defined as those mining entrepreneurs who've had 2 or more successes. And there are very, very few of them. And my plan is to interview between 8 and 12 of them. I've already mentioned the possible bias I could bring because of my career and the role in the industry. However, to minimize this bias, I've selected a design approach that integrates the strengths of my primary interviews along with secondary data sets, which I'll then use to triangulate the findings that emerge from these methods. So what is the significance of the study? Well, you'll see on the graphic on the right-hand side about the importance of mining in Africa and of course in Southern Africa itself. So I hope this study will assist junior miners to advance their projects. I hope this study will help junior miners de-risk the many variables that exist in the exploration and mining environment. I've spoken to many officials in Botswana, Zimbabwe and South Africa, where my company is operating, and they've shown an interest in this framework. And this is not surprising. If we look at the NDP 2030, for example, it encourages the people of South Africa to be creative in growing the economy. The African Union Mining Vision 2009 is something which is very, very close to my heart because it talks about increasing local entrepreneurship and local ownership. Not local ownership by regulatory means, such as what we have in South Africa around a 26% black economic empowerment, but by creating local entrepreneurs, raising local capital, and thus raising local ownership in mining companies. And the research very clearly shows the importance of mining, not just in terms of the fifth industrial revolution and in terms of the sustainability development scenario, but also its multiplier effect in that 7 to 10 times more people, more money centers around the mining industry. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, if you look at the graphic on the right-hand side, it takes 1,000 geological deposits to create 100 geological projects, which produces 10 feasibility studies, which only produces one operating mine. So it's not surprising that 90% of juniors who follow an ad hoc approach actually fail. So I hope this proposal will add value and de-risk many of these variables. And I hope this proposal then begins to address the absence of a fully integrated business incubator to support smaller mining ventures. My proposal goes to some extent to detail the research design, philosophy, methodology, and data collection methods. And I hope by examining all of these challenges faced by junior miners and drawing lessons from successful mining incubators, the study aims to enhance the commercial success of these ventures. Thank you very much indeed for your time, Professor Singh, panel, learned members of Da Vinci. I'd now like to open up the floor for discussion, questions and debate. Thank you.